Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. I've been really finding some amazing new Napoleon Hill that I had not read before. We've read quite a bit on the channel, but I'm always looking for more material. I'm a big fan of Napoleon Hill. He taught a specific way of utilizing the mind to create prosperity that came about after years and years of research looking at very successful people that had done just that. In this particular chapter I'm reading from his book, Grow Rich with Peace of Mind, he is discussing the eternal law of compensation. Now, I have an episode on the law of compensation, and I love the discussion of the law of compensation when it comes to Napoleon Hill. This is a prosperity teaching with some very wonderful stories and examples, and it comes in that classic Napoleon Hill style. Win mighty aid from the eternal law of compensation. The law of compensation can work for you or against you, depending upon the way you guide it. It may take many years for punishment to follow transgression or for reward to follow virtue, but the compensation always will find you out. Nature makes sure that any excess is followed by a leveling. Fear gives way to the law of compensation. And envy and malice also disappear from life when one understands how the law of compensation can lead anyone to great success, because anyone can control the way it works for him. Drop in at any public library, even a very small one, and ask the librarian for Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay on compensation. She will almost certainly be able to direct you to the exact shelf where Emerson's works are lined up. Just a sober row of books, but I think of them as buzzing and humming with success potential. It will be easy to spot the volume that contains compensation. It will be the volume most thumbed, yet alas, that volume may be missing. Some overeager student has borne it off to help him write his term paper and has kept it. Or some man who wonders why he never got ahead has made it his own to read over and over. Spare a sigh for those who do not realize the failure potential that is inherent in stealing, and do your bit for others by buying the library another copy. Secure a copy for yourself too. Once you have read compensation 3 times, you will read it 100 times. You will want it at your bedside. It is a must for people who want to understand themselves, understand the world, and find wonderful peace of mind that will stay with them. The law of compensation in action. Before we finish, we shall come back to that essay, which is perhaps the most important ever written. Now, I want to tell you a story in several parts. I know it is a true story. I lived it. As you know, I've made many mistakes, and I have yielded at times to the wrong kind of emotions. Had I not learned from my mistakes, I would not consider myself worthy of giving advice, but very definitely I have learned from them and built success and peace of mind upon my hard-won knowledge. But there was a time some decades ago when I had been through a personal crisis, and it got me. This was connected with an adventure which, while it brought me valuable experience, brought me little else. I found it necessary to make a fresh start financially, mentally, and spiritually. Being in the downtown business district of Atlanta, Georgia, I visited my friend and former business associate, Mark Wooding. He recently had opened a large cafeteria right in the heart of the business section. Mark told me his business was in serious difficulty. He had not taken into account the fact that downtown Atlanta business houses close early each evening, or at least they did in that era. After that early close of business, the district was as quiet as a graveyard. The result was that he did splendidly at lunchtime, but had very few customers at the dinner hour, when he had counted on making a good part of his income. Was there any way of persuading people to have dinner at his cafeteria? He hadn't thought of any. My mind had been filled with my own problems, but I had learned long before that when one cannot find the solution to his own problems, the best thing he can do is to look for someone with a greater problem and help him find its solution. I switched my thoughts to a consideration of my friend's predicament. Looking around, I noted he had a beautiful large dining room, which could seat several hundred people. His equipment was superb. The location was good on a corner near transportation and parking facilities. People could reach the cafeteria easily, and they could eat well and pleasantly when they got there. How to bring them in? I decided to give away information I had been in the habit of selling. The answer flashed into my mind. I suggested to Mark that I give a lecture course on the science of personal achievement. I would lecture each night, right there in the dining room. The lectures would be free to all who came for dinner and remained for the lectures. We announced this plan through the local newspapers. We sent printed announcements to all the business houses in the district. And the first night we turned away more people than we could seat. There was seldom a night thereafter when we did not have to turn away a large number of people from the completely filled dining room. Mark's dinners became the major source of his income in record time. The cost? Just the cost of the advertising. I'd been in the habit of charging for my services as a lecturer, but now I donated my services without charge to a friend who needed a helping hand. That set certain invisible forces going, and that is the first part of the story. The law of compensation begins to work on my behalf. We are not gifted with crystal balls with which to foretell the future. If I had this power, which an all-wise mind wisely has withheld from us, I would have seen that my unselfish giving marked the most important turning point of my life. Even now, in considering the compensation I eventually received for my services, I realize I am still being paid well. Before we go any further, remember this: I cured my own ills by helping a friend cure his. Pause right now and think how you can apply that mighty principle which always pays, and often in far more than money. My lectures on the success philosophy attracted a wide variety of people to Wooding's cafeteria. Among them were several business executives, including an executive of the Georgia Power Company. The man was so impressed by the lectures that he asked me to be the guest speaker at a private meeting of the leading officers of several Southern electric power companies. The law of compensation was humming and buzzing all around me. In the audience at that private meeting was Horner Pace, an executive of the South Carolina Electric and Gas Company. After I had spoken, he introduced himself. He told me he had been a student of the science of personal achievement for many years. He said, "I have a friend I'd like you to meet. He is a president of a small college and owns a good-sized printing house. He speaks your language so well that I strongly suspect he is another of your long-distance students. You ought to know each other. Will you write him?" I wrote promptly. The college president and publisher came immediately to Atlanta to call upon me. Perhaps the shade of the sage of Concord, as Emerson was called, smiled over my shoulder during the 2-hour conversation. The college president and I made a verbal agreement. I would move to his hometown and rewrite my entire philosophy, and he would publish it. Patterns appear in many lives. As you see, when I have needed a publisher, merely following my own philosophy always helped me find one. On the 1st of January 1941, I began work on the science of personal achievement, now being taught in schools, which I sponsor throughout this and other countries. I find a very special compensation. Looking back, I see that the reversals I had suffered just prior to meeting Mark Wooding had left me in something of a state of shock. Now I transmuted that shock into hard work, a labor of love. Every misfortune always carries the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit. Soon I found peace of mind such as I never had known. Before I describe the third episode in this many-sided story of compensation, let me make clear that romance definitely was not on my mind. As for marriage, it did not seem like anything that ever would happen to me. Yet a peaceful and active mind is not afraid of new ideas or new conditions. When I had moved to that little South Carolina town, I took an apartment that happened to be near the home of the publisher's secretary. For several months after my arrival, I saw the secretary only at her desk, in the ordinary course of business. She had been the support of her family since her father had died while she was quite young. She now had been associated with 2 generations of the family that had owned the business. She had a responsible position, and she was quite happy in her work. Between family responsibilities, she helped to educate her younger sisters, and the demands of holding down an executive job, she was very busy. She had given little thought to marriage. One might say it was the last thing on her mind. And now perhaps a little pagan cherub with a bow and arrow smiled over my shoulder. Now and then I invited the secretary to join me for dinner. Now and again we went to a show in one of the nearby towns. I found out that the moment she got away from family and office matters, she had quite a different personality, a wonderful personality. The woman was almost a perfect duplicate of the greatest woman I had ever known, my stepmother. No wonder I admired her. The picture began to develop rapidly. We took motor trips. On Saturday mornings, we listened together to the Mormon Tabernacle radio services while we were driving in the country. The law of compensation works in ways that are strange and unpredictable. I parted from this woman who attracted me so deeply. First of all, the pattern again. I lost my publisher. The attack on Pearl Harbor and the events that followed affected my publisher's affairs so strongly that he brought our arrangement to an abrupt end. Then I left town. This event arose from the telephone call from the Latorno company, which I have related, and I took over that important public relations assignment at their plant in Georgia. There I was destined to meet the greatest opportunity of my life to demonstrate the soundness of my philosophy as a builder of harmonious relations between employees and employer. With all modesty, I can say that my influence in that plant with its 2,000 employees changed everyone for the better, including top management. Later I read that the war in the Pacific depended heavily for its success on U.S. ability to move quantities of earth and rock in building airstrips on occupied islands. Latorno earth-moving machinery was largely used on these jobs, and perhaps indirectly I made my contribution. Again, one opportunity led to another. I decided on another move to make my philosophy all the more available to industry. I would prepare a film about it. And this caused a move to Los Angeles, hub of the motion picture industry. I had not forgotten that wonderful woman in South Carolina. She had not forgotten me. The day before I left for the West Coast, she became my wife. She is also my secretary, my priceless business associate, and the most important member of my mastermind group. We have now delighted in more than 20 years of this perfect partnership. Talk about compensation. Every act rewards itself. That is Emerson speaking. We shall visit with him soon. You realize I am sure that the reward of any act may not be a reward as such, but rather a penalty if that is what the act deserves. The act rewards itself, not you, in the sense that is meant here, and so the reward is fitting. This, you may say, is nothing but old-fashioned morality. Indeed it is. It is modern morality as well, valid when man invented the wheel, valid when perhaps man will invent the means to duplicate himself in a test tube. And it is more than morality. I have shown you the law of compensation at work in my life, in the hope that you will stop and think of ways it has worked for you. You will see these ways as manifestations of cause and effect. You perform some action and that got the ball rolling, but can it be an accident that thousands of years of commentary refer to the fact that the act of giving invariably precedes the act of receiving? That when we cast bread upon the waters, it does come back. We see the law of compensation as it brings us a better job, a sum of money, an opportunity to fulfill ourselves, a meeting with someone who turns out to be a lifelong partner in love, and there is much we do not see. Unseen, silent forces influence us constantly. Some are good for us, some are harmful. This volume speaks on many pages of the solid bread and butter aspects of life, but it speaks as well of the unseen and the omnipresent. As I show you how to be rich with peace of mind, I also show you how to choose the friendly, invisible forces rather than the unfriendly, and how to make the favorable forces your allies. Now let us sit down with Mr. Emerson by candlelight in his book-lined study. Every act rewards itself, or in other words, integrates itself in a twofold manner. First, in the thing or in the real nature, and secondly, in the circumstance or in apparent nature. Men call the circumstance the retribution. The casual retribution is in the thing and is seen by the soul. The retribution in the circumstance is seen by the understanding. It is inseparable from the thing, but is often spread over a long time, and so does not become distinct until after many years. The specific stripes may follow late after the offense, but they follow because they accompany it. Crime and punishment grow out of one stem. Punishment is a fruit that unsuspected ripens within the flower of the pleasure which concealed it. Cause and effect, means and ends, seed and fruit cannot be severed, for the effect already blooms in the cause, the end pre-exists in the means, the fruit in the seed. Think back upon the story. I have told you in detail the 4 episodes of success in my life which began at Wooding's in Atlanta. The causing behind those episodes was a simple act of service rendered to a friend I was able to help. It brought me blessings which still continue. Had I substituted my act of service some unselfish or unworthy act, I would not now enjoy those blessings, but might still suffer under the penalty which the same law of compensation surely would have brought my way. There is a third salient party to all our bargains. Remember that, the Sage of Concord continues. Men suffer all their life long under the foolish superstition that they can be cheated, but it is as impossible for a man to be cheated by anyone but himself as for a thing to be, and not to be, at the same time. There is a third silent party to all our bargains. The nature and soul of things takes on itself the guarantee of the fulfillment of every contract, so that honest service cannot come to loss. If you serve an ungrateful master, serve him the more. Put God in your debt. Every stroke shall be repaid. The longer the payment is withheld, the better for you, for compound interest on compound interest is the rate and usage of the exchequer. The third silent party, there is the unseen force which in its timeless way makes sure of the fulfillment of every contract we make with the world. And now let us see how Emerson expresses his understanding of the fact that every adversity carries with it the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit. The changes which break up at short intervals the prosperity of men are advertisements of a nature whose law is growth. Evermore is the order of nature to grow, and every soul is by this intrinsic necessary quitting its whole system of things, its friends and home and laws and faith, as the shellfish crawls out of its beautiful but stony case, because it no longer admits of its growth and slowly forms a new house. And yet the compensations of calamity are made apparent to the understanding also after long intervals of time. A fever, a mutilation, a cruel disappointment, a loss of wealth, a loss of friends seems at the moment unpaid loss and unpayable. But sure, the years reveal the deep remedial force that underlies all facts. The death of a dear friend, wife, brother, lover, which seemed nothing but privation, somewhat later assumes the aspect of a guide or genius, for it commonly operates revolutions in our way of life, terminates an epoch of infancy or of youth which was waiting to be closed, breaks up a wanted occupation or a household or style of living, and allows the formation of new ones more friendly to the growth of character. It permits or constrains the formation of new acquaintances and the reception of new influences that prove of the first importance to the next years. And the man or woman who would have remained a sunny garden flower with no room for its roots and too much sunshine for its head, by the falling of the walls and the neglect of the gardener, is made the banyan of the forest, yielding shade and fruit to wide neighborhoods of men. If Emerson had not written those lines long before I was born, I might well believe he was writing directly to me. Do you sense, perhaps, that he was writing directly to you? Please, as you read, take my experiences as reminders to consider your own. The lessons I have learned have been learned by millions, and none of us is very different from his brother. I am particularly indebted to Emerson for his views on the subject of fear. They were responsible for a self-imposed house cleaning which removed from my mind all breeding places of fear, and I hope the following paragraph does the same for you. Fear is an instructor of great sagacity. One thing he always teaches, that there is rottenness where he appears. He is a carrion crow, and though you see not well what he hovers for, there is death somewhere. Our property is timid. Our laws are timid. Our cultivated classes are timid. Fear for ages has boded and mowed and gibbered our government and property. That obscene bird is not there for nothing. He indicates great wrongs which must be revised. And although I once had a tendency to envy seemingly more fortunate persons, that tendency left me after I was influenced by the following excerpt from Emerson's essay on compensation. Every excess causes a defeat, every defeat an excess. Every sweet hath its sour, every evil its good. Every faculty which is a receiver of pleasure has an equal penalty put on its abuse. It is to answer for its moderation with its life. For every grain of wit there is a grain of folly. For everything you have missed, you have gained something else. And for everything you gain, you lose something. If riches increase, they are increased that use them. If the gatherer gathers too much, nature takes out of the man what she puts into his chest. Swells the estate but kills the owner. Nature hates monopolies and exceptions. The waves of the sea do not more speedily seek a level from their loftiest tossing than the varieties of condition tend to equalize themselves. There is always some leveling circumstance that puts down the overbearing, the strong, the rich, the fortunate, substantially on the same ground with all others. Those who have tested Emerson's views find them based on eternal truth. Others, who do not really test them, may consider them an abstract preachment or may point to all kinds of exceptions which are not exceptions at all, for time is an essential element of compensation and nobody can tell what time will bring. Finally, let us join this great mind in thinking about thinking. Beware, when the great God lets loose a thinker on this planet, then all things are at risk. It is as when a conflagration has broken out in a great city, and no man knows what is safe, or where it will end. There is not a piece of science, but its flank may be turned tomorrow. There is not any literary reputation, not the so-called eternal names of fame, that may not be revised and condemned. The very hope of man, the thoughts of his heart, the religion of nations, the manners and morals of mankind, are all at the mercy of a new generalization. Thus the power of mind force to change the world. You may not change the world, but your mind force is ready, willing, and able to cause in your world the changes you need and want, no matter how mighty they may be. Emerson is not alone in celebrating the power of thought to move mountains. I do not know of any other great thinker whose works do not show this inherent understanding that we are thinking beings who act according to our thoughts. So that thought always precedes action. Thought always builds before hands build. Thought is mighty beyond measurement, and so is achievement. Mighty when the thoughts behind it are unfettered and unafraid. The philosopher as a practical person. We tend to think of philosophers as people who dwell in ivory towers of thought and come up with books that take a lot of learning before you can understand them. There's considerable truth in this picture. Philosophy has come so far since the ancient Greeks first mused upon the world and man that these days the philosophers seem to be talking to the philosophers and we ordinary folk are out in the cold. Consider, however, the basic purpose of philosophy is to search out the why of things. That is why the science of personal achievement is a philosophy rather than a method or a system. In my previous books, as in this one, I give the truly basic answers to the questions. Why do some men succeed in life while others fail? Why do some individuals and couples live in harmony while others live in constant conflict? Why do some groups get along with other groups in a spirit of mutual help while others hamper and frustrate each other? While the methods by which you make money or handle your affairs or please your wife or preserve harmony between management and labor are important, and I show you a number of the key methods, it is the underlying philosophy which is more important still. When your mind holds firm to the basic concepts of wealth, peace of mind, and life success, you build on a firm foundation. When you try to apply methods merely in themselves, you may find you are trying to build on sand. Thus, it pays to be a philosopher in a perfectly practical sense. Faced with a problem, or desirous of improving some situation, or influencing some other person for your mutual benefit, pause and remember you are a practical philosopher. Thus, you focus your mind upon the basic reasons which always have worked and always will, and immediately you are well guided. The philosopher in action. Does the philosopher meet with some disaster or misfortune? He looks for the cause. He seeks the lesson. He armors himself against the event ever happening again. Likewise, he notices the mistakes other people make. Knowing that human beings are very like one another, he watches for any tendency in himself to make the same mistake and thus almost surely will not make it. The philosopher can foretell the future no more than can others. He knows, however, that history has a way of repeating itself. He takes inventory of the past and often can evoke a very valid idea of the future. The philosopher bears firmly in mind that the way to help others is to help them find their best selves. He does not try to become a reformer and let himself in for endless effort, which is not likely to do too much good. Being a philosopher, such a man knows that time is the great leveler. He is patient and the days and years are his allies, never his adversaries. Knowing that a peaceful mind is likewise an efficient mind, the philosopher allows no heckling from the kind of emotions which upset the mind and make it incapable of conceiving greatly. Knowing there is no limit to mind power, the philosopher does not hem in his powers with small, mean thinking, but thinks in those generous and wide-ranging terms upon when achievement is built. The philosopher businessman does not confuse today's profits with a lifetime's peace of mind and life's success. He will not, therefore, take unfair advantage of anyone, for every act rewards itself. The philosopher knows that thoughts are things, that every thought he sends forth, be it good or bad, comes back in due time, greatly multiplied, to curse him or to bless him according to its nature. The chains of the past never drag after a philosopher with their mournful clank of looking backward. He knows that success lies ahead, life lies ahead, and only takes from the past whatever may have been a valuable lesson. The true philosopher never slanders another person when he feels he must give way to righteous indignation. He does not do this as though it were his way in life. It could be for a philosopher. He expresses his indignation as though he were writing it on the sand at the water's edge and hopes no man passes that way before the tide comes in. Sharing is a part of a true philosophy, so the philosopher shares freely, knowing that as he shares his blessings, he prepares for new blessings. He knows that sharing plants opportunity for self-benefit, which is well-earned and well-deserved, and that is the kind of benefit he wants to come to him. As philosophers, we pass this book in review. Yes, in our role as seekers of the truths behind human nature and human conduct, we have reviewed much of this book to this page. As a philosopher, remind yourself of the usefulness of review, for the human mind learns by repetition and reinforcement until at length the truth is rule. The very word philosopher is made of two Greek words meaning love and truth. The philosopher is a lover of the truth. I close this with an anecdote about my grandfather. He believed, as I do, that people learn best from experience. There is a bite in this anecdote, but I believe it helped to teach a bit of philosophy to a certain city slicker. The person to whom I refer stood at the side of the country road which I traveled with my grandfather from Powell's River, Virginia, on our way back home with a load of hay. I was very young enough to be impressed with the stranger's sharp clothing and superior manner. He did not ask for a ride, but jumped onto the slow-moving wagon and said, "Give us a ride, hayseed." Grandfather made no reply. The horse ambled on, and we left some miles of dusty road behind us. When we had reached grandfather's place and turned in toward his barn, the stranger slid off the wagon and said, "Hey, how far is it to Big Stone Gap from here?" "Well," said grandfather consideringly, "if you start walking back the way we came, it is about 20 miles. If you keep on the way we're going, I'd say it's about 25,000. Once more, the supreme secret has touched your mind, perhaps to stay, perhaps to return later and stay with you always." The law of compensation. Emerson's essay on compensation remains one of the most important essays ever written. It is a must for anyone who wants to understand himself and the world in which he lives, and to find peace of mind all his life. Once the author of this book was in serious difficulty, but he still gave his time and services free to a friend, and his compensation from this act has covered many years and still continues. Unseen forces are at work among us, and this book shows you how to choose the friendly forces rather than the unfriendly. Every act rewards itself. The law of compensation in its visible aspects, as for instance when it brings an opportunity following some action, may seem like nothing more than cause and effect. But as Emerson says, there is a third silent party to all our bargains, and this is the unseen force which balances the books in the end. Men may believe they can be cheated, but it is impossible for man to be cheated by anyone but himself. And although recompense may seem long in coming, there is a kind of spiritual compound interest which we receive at last. The law of nature is growth, says Emerson. He remarks that this growth often includes adversities of many kinds, yet a deep remedial force operates to turn hardship and sorrows into guides for later life, and these same hardships often serve to end some period of life which was waiting to be closed. Also, adversity breaks off certain accustomed ways of living and helps us form new ones which may be necessary for growth. The person who is tempered by hardship becomes a stronger person who can do more for himself and more for others. Emerson is not the only philosopher who celebrates the power of the mind and points to the changes a great mind makes in the world. Your own mind can change your world. Turn yourself into a philosopher and search out the basic reasons for success and happiness. Go back to these reasons for guidance before you turn to bread and butter methods, and you build on a solid foundation. In considering yourself as a philosopher, you can review this book, applying every basic principle you have learned and remembering how each principle is used in action. This important chapter by Napoleon Hill develops one important point that you should continuously think about. Wherever you're at or whatever you're doing in your life, if you're struggling and you want to change or transform your life, think outside of yourself. How can you be of service to someone else? What can you do to help someone else? It's a good starting point. Offer yourself freely without expectation of return. When you do this, the universe seems to provide back to you in unseen ways. There is a third unseen force that Napoleon Hill is talking about in this essay that always brings things to balance. This balance is a key component to everything that you do in your life. If you're making a lot of money but you're ripping people off, there will be a return that comes back and you will be ripped off, or money will just disappear from your wallet. This balancing force is important in all your affairs. If you think of something so desperately and you want it so desperately, there will be a balancing force that will come along and take it away from you. You must find this balance in the actions that you take on the world. And if you're seeking out prosperity, utilize the law of compensation. You will get what you return, and there's compound interest. If it seems like you haven't been paid back for the wonderful services that you offered, don't worry. That means that it's building compound interest, and when you finally are rewarded, wonderful things will happen for you. You can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com, and welcome to The Reality Revolution.